The following video was produced by the Mem. Santa Mémoire Monréalais, for its online encyclopedia, Mémoire de Montréal. Directed by Stéphanie Lessard-Bérubé in 2018, it is entitled, José-Louis Jacome's Story. The video is part of the collection, Stories of Immigration. It also appears in the dossiers, From One Island to Another, Azorian Immigration, and in the file, Encontros, the Portuguese Community of Montreal. On an autumn day, José-Louis Jacome begins his story standing in front of 6605, Rue Saint-Dominique. He is an older man with a head of gray hair. Then, near Parc-sur-Madeleine Gagnon, José-Louis points out certain buildings in the neighborhood on a hand-drawn map. He carries photos in a yellow Kodak box, showing them throughout his story. Later, on Dante Street, he stands in front of Pizzeria Napoletana. José-Louis looks toward the Notre Dame de la Défense church, and the school that bears the same name. He then goes to 7624 Rue Drolet, and ends his account at Parc Jerry, near the gazebo. The video starts, and the title appears. José-Louis Jacome's Story.
This is where we landed on March 25, 1958. It was a stormy day. Obviously, we were a little lost in all that, because we came from a very small village. For us, to settle here, on the third floor, was very special. Just opposite was the Sainte Cécile Girls' School, which has since been demolished. You can see the Saint-Jean-de-la-Croix Church. And in the background, the Saint-Jean-de-la-Croix Boys' School. For my father, the proximity of schools was certainly a very important consideration in his decision to settle here. Choosing between French and English school. I don't remember having a debate about it at home. But as we saw a little later, there was a debate between French school and English school. As for us, we went to school in French. It must be remembered that at that time, French schools were run by brothers, and therefore, French schools were rather conservative and less open to immigration than English schools. There are many Portuguese and Italian immigrants who were simply refused French schooling in those years, even though they were Catholics. So, here, we see a photo of our family in front of the door, right here on the second floor. That's the neighbor's daughter in the back. And in fact, the building in the background over there, you see it there. I have pictures, here, of the kitchen. Here's my mother and a table, with all kinds of good things to eat. Food was very important for people who immigrated, because most of them had been in situations where food was rationed, more scarce. With my father there was never an issue of you're going to quit school, you're going to go to work. This was the case with many Portuguese people, and even with people I'm still friends with, whose fathers told them when they were 16, you are going to go to work, but you are also going to give me your money. We are here at 6605 Rue Saint-Dominique. We had Sainte Cécile Girls' School, the Saint-Jean-de-la-Croix Church, and here Saint-Jean-de-la-Croix School. And we're going to go up Rue Saint-Dominique here, up to Rue Dante, to go to the Madonna della Difesa Church. Afterwards, we could walk on Rue Saint-Dominique, and go to 7624 Drolet. This is where my parents bought their first house, a few steps from Parc Jerry.
José-Louis heads towards Saint-Jean-de-la-Croix School.
But that school, for me, was truly the first step of integration. When I got here, I didn't know a single word of French. I was the only Portuguese, the only immigrant in our class. But my father, who had settled in Montreal 4 years earlier on Boulevard Saint-Laurent, we see him here in front of the church of Saint-Jean-de-la-Croix. My first communion, with a note that I wrote to my grandmother.
Oferece meu retrato com prova de grande amizade, muitos beijos na minha avó.
So, I offer this picture to my dear grandmother, with all my love, here in Montreal. Like in Toronto, you mostly have Azorian immigration. Portugal, remember, is 2,000 kilometers from the Azores. It is very far. The Portuguese who live in Europe, they tend to immigrate to Europe. The Portuguese from the Azores, they will mainly immigrate to the United States or Canada. I'll go to the other side because I want to show you a picture. We see my mother and the 3 children. A photo taken by my father of the Madonna della Difesa church. We also see the school. There were celebrations, just like the ones we had in the Azores. Religious, Catholic, holidays. There was a great similarity, and that's what we were looking for here. We were, as you can see, a few steps from our house.
José-Louis crosses Rue Drolet.
This is the first house my father bought in Montreal. In 1963, 5 years after our arrival, and 9 years after he came here. My father and my mother standing in front of the house, probably on a Sunday. They died in that house in 1988, so 63 to 88, 25 years. In 63, when my father bought that house, he bought it from an Italian. The neighborhood was rather Italian then. The Italians left the neighborhood for Saint Léonard, Saint Michel. So, when we arrived here in this house, we had a small yard. My father grew all sorts of vegetables and tomatoes in the yard. Also, in the yard, he made a chicken coop, which was a bit strange. The rest of us, it drove us crazy.
He continues on his way to Parc Jerry.
For us, Parc Jerry was like, it was a green space. We came from an island. Everything was green. Everything was countryside, you know. And finding yourself in a big city is kind of a shock. Having this park next to the house was extraordinary. And we often went for picnics on Sundays. In Little Portugal, the parks were much smaller. There was almost nothing that compared to it. In 1963, it was at Parc Jerry that the first Portuguese celebration took place, called Senhor Santo Cristo. We had just bought our house. We had a large basement, and several family friends who lived in the plateau. In that area there were no basements, so they came here to see the celebration. Then, we continued at home, with lots and lots of people.
Near the park gazebo.
I have a photo here, with my oldest and best friend, Roger Lantain, who also lived in the neighborhood. As you can see here, it was around the era of the Beatles. I really think that the emotional link with the gazebo is that in Portugal and all over Europe, they have gazebos like that in the parks, often with music on holidays. We were the first, or among the first Portuguese to settle in the area. And after that, there were several who settled here in the area. So we had, as usual, a Portuguese grocery store. We had a few bakeries, not far from the Jean Talon market. For the Portuguese, living close to a market was an important issue at that time. We took the bus here to go to the St. Louis district. We went to Portuguese grocery stores and the famous Waldman, and then we would come back with supplies of fresh fish and all that. And what was funny, but less funny at the time, was that, when we rode back on the bus, the 55, with those loads of fish, it wasn't long before people noticed that there were strong smells, that going there or going to the Jean Talon market, those are two things that bothered me. It was because, at that time, at the Jean Talon market, they sold live chickens and rabbits. For us, for the children, and especially for me because I was often the one who had to go. It made us feel totally ashamed. And we were so afraid that our friends would see us with live animals in our bags. Not many people did that. A few years later, they stopped doing that at the Jean Talon market. It was like a little expedition. On Saturday mornings, my father never got a car in the end.
The video ends with images of José-Louis crossing Boulevard Saint-Laurent, then walking on Rue Villeray. Credits. Story, José-Louis Jacome. Video, Stéphanie Lessard-Bérubé. Photos, personal collection of José-Louis Jacome. Thanks to Fernand Jacome. Audio description by Ella Cuscio.